Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online news summary for Saturday, September 27th. We hope everyone's had a great Right to Know week. It's been a big one, with privacy commissioners at both the national and provincial levels releasing major findings, and a wave of stories that give us plenty to dig into. We'll begin here in British Columbia, where an unprecedented audit of one of the province's largest public bodies found serious failures to comply with access to information law. Then we'll scan access stories from across the country. On the privacy side, TikTok faces stinging criticism from federal and provincial watchdogs for failing to protect children's data. We'll also track the fallout from recent data breaches, including new legislation in Nova Scotia. Internationally, the United States continues to rewrite long-standing rules, with Trump and his allies pressing to expand presidential power, criminalize anti-fascist sentiment, and gain access to sensitive voter information. And we'll close with updates on Canada's own controversial bills, C2 and C4, which FIPA will be following closely in the weeks ahead. Let's dive in. We start with the University of British Columbia, where the BC Information and Privacy Commissioner has found systemic failures in handling freedom of information requests. The audit revealed UBC took an average of 100 business days to respond to requests, more than triple the legal limit under BC's Freedom of Information law. In fact, UBC missed the statutory timeline 90% of the time, the lowest compliance rate in a decade of such audits. The Commissioner's office traced delays to 3 stages. UBC waited an average of 18 days just to start record searches, another 28 days to retrieve records, and nearly 2 months more to process responses. Concerns were also raised about applicant anonymity. Commissioner Michael Harvey warns this is a cautionary tale for all public bodies, and urged training, system improvements, and a culture shift to make transparency fundamental, not secondary. The report made 9 recommendations, from eliminating UBC's backlog within a year to retraining staff on their duty to assist. UBC has started making changes, and the OIPC will follow up. For listeners wanting more detail, the full report, fact sheet, and even a video explainer are all available on the OIPC's website. Meanwhile, in other access to information stories, in British Columbia, the public service strike has escalated, with picket lines now blocking a Ministry of Citizens Services office that processes FOI requests. Workers also targeted the province's Gaming Policy and Enforcement branch, a major revenue source. The union says the 2 new picket locations were strategically chosen to highlight the essential role played by public service workers in BC. It says members are expecting the Citizen Services picket to delay frontline services. The union has already escalated job action earlier this week, when the union said on Tuesday it was targeting services for the mining sector, just as BC is trying to speed up several projects' development. Delays for frontline services and ripple effects across procurement and lotteries are expected. In Alberta, controversy is brewing after the province allowed its formal ban on police carding to expire. The Alberta government has chosen not to renew a regulation banning the practice of police officers stopping without reason people to check their IDs, with the province saying the practice is still prohibited under other laws. Police are still entitled to stop people to check identification, with specific reasons to do so through street checks. However, the province doesn't require police services to submit annual reports detailing the number of attempts officers make to collect information from members of the public. Officials insist the practice remains prohibited under the Police Act, but critics, including criminologist Temitope Oriola, warned the move shows administrative tone deafness and is profoundly disturbing. Prior research from a 2016 FOI request in Edmonton revealed Indigenous people were 4 times more likely to be carded, highlighting long-standing equity concerns. Shifting east, a Nova Scotia home-sharing program fell far short of expectations. Launched in 2023 to match homeowners with renters, it was supposed to secure 500 leases, but documents released under FOI show it produced just 60 leases over 2 years at a cost of $1.35 million, or about $22,500 per lease. Opposition critics are calling it a waste of taxpayer money. The program was announced in August 2023 as a way to help people find affordable housing by partnering with a nonprofit organization called HappyPad that operates an online home-sharing platform. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston has said he wished the program's results had been better, but that the partnership was a success to the 60 people who found a place to rent through the platform. On the federal level, Natasha Belowski, LGI reporter at Canada's National Observer, has information obtained through FOI requests that Canada's Auditor General is probing whether Ottawa is adequately protecting billions in public assets from climate change. The Department of National Defense received a notification letter that the Auditor General is launching a performance audit of protecting federal assets from climate change. Daniel Henstra, a professor of political science and co-director of the Climate Risk Research Group at University of Waterloo, identifies that the military is particularly vulnerable to one impact of climate change, thawing permafrost, which can seriously degrade Canada's military investments. Results are expected this spring. And also, Canada's National Observer from LGI reporter Sonal Gupta, we learn of a program in Ontario training Indigenous youth as water protectors. On Christian Island, students earn school credits while learning water science and stewardship, part of a broader effort to address chronic water advisories in First Nations. Advocates say empowering young people with these skills could prevent the next generation of boil water advisories. Federal records obtained by Canada's National Observer through an Access to Information and Privacy request show Canada has invested more than $7.1 billion since 2015 in building and repairing water and wastewater infrastructure on reserves. Despite this, First Nation communities still face persistent water quality problems, many of which are due to a lack of qualified operators. Research from Water First shows that 18% of First Nations across Canada and 32% of those in Ontario are currently under a drinking water advisory. Shifting to privacy, Canada's federal and provincial commissioners have delivered their strongest rebuke yet of TikTok. After a joint investigation, they concluded the company's measures to keep children off the platform and protect their sensitive personal information were inadequate. The investigation looked into whether TikTok complies with Canadian privacy legislation and whether valid and meaningful consent is being obtained, with a focus on how TikTok's privacy practices apply to children and youths. Despite TikTok's rules banning under 13-year-old users, watchdogs found hundreds of thousands of Canadian children still use the app, and that the company collects and uses their data without valid consent. The regulators say TikTok has agreed to improve transparency and strengthen its age assurance measures, but they warn that risks remain, especially given the obligations of TikTok's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, under national security laws in China. Privacy and safety concerns have been around TikTok and its Chinese parent company ByteDance because of Chinese national security laws that compel domestic organizations to assist with intelligence gathering. For those interested, the full investigation reports are linked in our show notes. Other privacy stories this week show just how wide-ranging these issues have become. In Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith's Alberta Next panel continues to spark controversy, not only by floating withdrawal from the Canada Pension Plan and replacing the RCMP, but also by proposing to mark citizenship on driver's licenses. Alberta's Privacy Commissioner Diane McLeod has raised serious concerns, warning this is highly sensitive information with little clear benefit. Indicating that citizenship can be sensitive information, the government would need to demonstrate how any benefit of including it on a driver's license would outweigh the associated privacy risks. Danielle Smith has also directed her jobs minister to use all legal means possible to give Alberta more control over immigration. In a new mandate letter given to Minister Joseph Scow, Smith said Alberta needs to ensure the province sees sustainable levels of newcomers. In Nova Scotia, fallout from the Nova Scotia Power cyber attack continues. The government has introduced new legislation to restrict how social insurance numbers can be collected, aiming to limit risks to citizens after it emerged that all customers may have been affected by the breach. Colton LeBlanc, the acting Minister of Service Nova Scotia, said the government wants to limit access to personal information in response to a cyber attack at the province's privately owned power utility. The latest Nova Scotia session sees new legislation and amendments to other laws, dealing with issues as diverse as domestic violence and protests that block logging roads on Crown land. The Nova Scotia legislature returned with affordability top of mind. The NDP is pushing a 10% rebate on power bills, while also demanding stronger protections for consumer data in the wake of the utility hack. The NDP leader said her party will also table a bill to protect consumer information, after data including social insurance numbers were stolen in a cyber attack on Nova Scotia Power earlier this year. That stolen data includes names, birth dates, email addresses, home addresses, customer account information, driver's license numbers, and, in some cases, bank account numbers and social insurance numbers. Next, in Ottawa, a case highlights data breaches can occur anywhere to anyone. A former RBC employee is facing charges after allegedly accessing the Prime Minister's personal banking data. The RCMP say a 23-year-old has been charged with fraud, identity theft, and trafficking in identifying personal information. The investigation did not lead the RCMP to believe there was any threat to the Prime Minister's safety or to national security. RCB says the employee has been terminated and is cooperating with investigators. Because the investigation involves the Prime Minister, it was assigned to the RCMP's Integrated National Security Enforcement Team in Montreal, where the report was made. Keeping focus on the federal level, Artificial Intelligence Minister Evan Solomon says Canada will unveil a refreshed AI strategy later this year, paired with a new data protection bill. He pledged reforms to address deepfakes, strengthen children's privacy, and modernize Canada's outdated privacy law. Various topics related to AI will be looked at, including research, adoption, commercialization, investment, infrastructure, skills, and safety and security. The government is also planning to solicit input from the public. Canada was one of the first countries to launch a national AI strategy, which the government updated in 2022. The strategy focuses on commercialization, the development and adoption of AI standards, talent, and research. In the United States, the Trump administration continues to push the limits of presidential power. In Washington, Trump has asked the Supreme Court to remove Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve Board, part of a broader effort to give presidents sweeping control over independent agencies, setting up another major test of nearly 90 years of precedent protecting agency independence. Trump has previously won orders from the court's conservative majority to fire the presidentially appointed leaders of other independent federal agencies, including the National Labor Relations Board and the Federal Trade Commission, even as legal fights continue. Elsewhere, Trump signed an executive order declaring Antifa a domestic terrorist organization, even though experts note U.S. law doesn't allow such designations for domestic groups. Civil liberties advocates say the move threatens First Amendment protections. The White House released Trump's executive order shortly after he departed for New York, where he was addressing the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly. The executive order did not specify how Trump would go about designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. Antifa is a domestic entity and, as such, is not a candidate for inclusion on the State Department's list of foreign terror organizations. Meanwhile, immigration policy remains in turmoil. California has banned the majority of officers from wearing masks during raids, clashing with Trump's agents who insist anonymity is necessary. The Democratic governor said California is pushing back against the practice of masked agents without identification or badge numbers detaining people on the streets. It remains unclear how or whether the state can enforce the ban on federal agents. Trump administration officials have defended use of masks, saying immigration agents face strident and increasing harassment in public and online as they carry out enforcement in service of Trump's drive toward mass deportation. Next, in Chicago, body cam footage has contradicted claims about a fatal ICE shooting, sparking protests. The Department of Homeland Security has said the officer was seriously injured by the man who allegedly tried to evade arrest after agents pulled over his car in Franklin Park. This contradicts the officer's own statements in video that his injuries were nothing serious. Nearly 3 hours of video and audio clips obtained by the Associated Press through a Freedom of Information Act request sheds new light on the shooting that has escalated tensions amid a federal immigration crackdown in the country's third largest city. Across the country, federal agencies are continuing to press states for sensitive voter data, with South Carolina firing its election chief amid disputes over compliance. To close on an international note, a new study from Brazil shows how lax United States and Brazilian gun laws are fueling organized crime. Researchers found thousands of restricted-use firearms, many smuggled from the U.S., in the hands of Brazil's most powerful gangs. Researchers reviewed records of nearly 7,000 seized guns, combining data obtained through Freedom of Information requests. The data included seizure dates, locations, crime types, and weapon details. It's a reminder that the consequences of American policy often spill far beyond its borders. Back in Canada, debate over the government's new legislative agenda is heating up. A coalition of progressive groups has launched a common front of protests against Prime Minister Mark Carney's policies, from fossil fuel expansion to military spending. The protest group said a level of cross-country collaboration has been achieved, which has not been seen recently among progressive civil society groups. A coalition of 14 partner organizations and more than 300 endorsing groups represents movements for migrant justice, economic justice, indigenous rights, anti-war activism, and climate justice. High on their list of concerns are Bill C-2, which expands border and surveillance powers. Also in the spotlight is Bill C-4, which leaves political parties free to exploit personal data and even social bots in election campaigns. A recent editorial highlights politicians can program bots to dampen or suppress certain messages while amplifying other messages, a practice legal in Canada. Bill C-4 requires each party to develop a privacy policy, but it doesn't set clear guidelines for how our data can be used. Even though part of the bill proposes changes to the Canadian Elections Act, focusing on how parties can use our personal information, it takes few steps to protect privacy. As we've noted in past episodes, these bills raise profound questions about how Canadians' information can be accessed, shared, and manipulated. FIPA will continue monitoring both pieces of legislation closely and will be stepping up its own actions in the weeks ahead. As always, we hope today's stories help you stay informed about the fast-moving world of privacy, access to information, and public transparency. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring or consider making a donation. Our writer this week is Sean Fisk, with original music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIPA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible, and to you, our listeners, for your continued support. Stay safe and stay informed.